On a sweltering July morning, a man unassuming in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt quietly entered the police precinct. To the officers lounging nearby, he was simply another nobody. One smirked, stepping forward with a sneer and a cruel jibe. Moments later, the unthinkable happened. The officer spat in his face, laughter erupting around him. They had no idea the man they humiliated was no ordinary stranger. His true identity would soon reveal their grave mistake. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy. It was early morning when Michael Carter, a man in his late 40s with a calm, unassuming demeanor, walked through the bustling streets of Brookstone, Illinois. He kept his head down, blending into the steady flow of pedestrians. His scuffed sneakers, faded jeans, and plain gray t-shirt gave no hint of the authority he truly held. In fact, that was precisely the point. Michael had spent nearly 25 years climbing the ranks in law enforcement, battling corruption and fostering change wherever he served. Now, as the newly appointed chief of police for Brookstone's troubled precinct, he knew his initial challenge was to truly understand its culture, not through files or reports, but by experiencing it raw and unfiltered. The precinct he was now tasked to lead had a history marred by complaints of misconduct and a glaring lack of accountability. Michael had thoroughly reviewed the files, the incident reports, and the community letters pleading for change. Yet nothing could prepare him for experiencing it firsthand. As he approached the precinct's entrance, he noticed a group of officers gathered near the patrol cars, their chatter punctuated by bursts of laughter. They didn't give him a second glance as he passed, a reality that both stunned and worked to his advantage. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the hum of ringing phones and faint murmurs greeting him. The building's interior was precisely as he'd anticipated, clean, professional, but permeated by an air of complacency. Officers moved between desks with coffee cups in hand, chatting about sports and weekend plans. It was business as usual, devoid of any urgency or awareness of their new leader's arrival. Michael paused near a bulletin board covered with outdated notices and missing person flyers. His sharp eyes absorbed every detail, the dismissive expressions, the hierarchy of respect seemingly reserved for a select few, and the casual arrogance in the air. He had witnessed it before in precincts where complacency had supplanted purpose and ego had eclipsed integrity. As he moved toward the main hallway, a voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "Hey you! What are you doing here?" Michael turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered officer whose badge read Danvers. The man's smirk was as sharp as his tone, and Michael could feel the shift in the room's attention as others began to notice the exchange. "I'm just passing through," Michael replied evenly, his tone calm but firm. Danvers stepped closer, his posture dominating. "Passing through? You lost or something? Because this isn't a public hangout and you don't look like you belong here." The subtle snickers from nearby officers confirmed Michael's suspicion. They weren't just indifferent. They thrived on moments like this where they could assert their authority without question. Michael's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Danvers' smirk widened. "Oh yeah? Well, we don't need random nobodies hanging around. Why don't you take a walk?" Before Michael could respond, Danvers leaned in, and in an instant the officer spat directly in his face. A collective gasp followed, some officers stifling laughter while others looked away, too uncomfortable or apathetic to intervene. Michael stood still, the warm insult dripping down his cheek. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room on him, some amused, others indifferent. Without a word, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and deliberately, composedly, wiped his face clean. "Is this how you treat everyone?" he asked quietly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Danvers crossed his arms, his smirk unwavering. "Only the ones who don't matter." Michael's piercing gaze lingered on Danvers for a long moment before he stepped back and turned toward the briefing room. The intercom crackled to life, summoning all personnel for a meeting. Michael's pulse quickened, not from anger but from anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. The briefing room was a chaotic mix of voices and laughter as officers filed in, carrying steaming cups of coffee and talking over one another about last night's game and their weekend plans. The energy was casual, almost careless, as though they were far removed from the weight of the badge they wore. Michael Carter stepped into the room from a side door, unnoticed at first. He lingered near the corner, arms crossed, observing. Officers sat at the long table in the center or leaned casually against the walls, their backs to him. The tension from his earlier encounter with Danvers still simmered in his mind, but he held it in check. This was his moment and he wanted it to land with the weight it deserved. Captain Morris, a stout man with thinning gray hair, stood at the podium at the front of the room, attempting to quiet the crowd. All right, settle down," he barked, though his tone carried more familiarity than authority. Gradually the voices dimmed, though a few whispers and chuckles persisted. "We've got an important announcement today," Morris began, glancing at a piece of paper in his hand. "As most of you know, Chief Bradley retired last month and we've been awaiting his replacement. Well, today's the day." Some officers sat up straighter, their interest piqued. Others remained slouched, their faces indifferent. Danvers leaned back against the wall near the exit, a cocky grin still plastered on his face. Morris cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce you to your new chief of police, Michael Carter." All eyes turned toward the side of the room where Michael stood. Slowly he stepped forward, his sneakers scuffing lightly against the tiled floor. The casual posture of the officers shifted as recognition spread like a ripple through the room. Danvers' grin faltered, his confidence draining as if someone had pulled the rug out from under him. Michael reached the podium, placing a folder with the precinct's emblem on it before addressing the room. His calm demeanor hadn't changed, but now it carried the weight of authority that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Good morning," Michael began, his voice steady and deliberate. "As Captain Morris mentioned, my name is Michael Carter, and as of today, I am your new chief of police." The room was silent, the kind of silence that amplified the tension in the air. Some officers exchanged uneasy glances, while others stared straight ahead, unsure of what to expect. Danvers' face was flushed, his arms crossed tightly as he avoided Michael's gaze. Michael's eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of every officer, lingering just a fraction longer on Danvers before moving on. "When I arrived this morning," he continued, "I didn't come dressed in a suit or with an entourage announcing my arrival. I came in plain clothes. Why? Because I wanted to see this department for what it really is, not the polished version you might show me later." His words hung in the air, their weight sinking into the officers' minds. "What I witnessed was illuminating," Michael said, pausing for emphasis. His calm tone carried an edge that made it clear he was building to something. "And I want to be perfectly clear. The behavior I observed today does not represent the kind of department I intend to lead." A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward Danvers, who now stood frozen, his bravado crumbling under the spotlight. Michael turned directly toward him. "Officer Danvers," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Danvers flinched but said nothing, his eyes locked on the floor. "Would you like to share with the room how you greeted me this morning?" Michael asked, his tone firm but controlled. The question wasn't an invitation, it was a challenge. Danvers stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't realize that was the new chief." Michael interrupted, his voice sharp. "You didn't care to ask. You didn't take a moment to consider who I might be or why I was here. Instead, you decided that I didn't belong, and worse, you thought it was acceptable to demean me in front of your peers." The room was suffocatingly silent now. Some officers stared at Danvers with wide eyes, while others avoided looking at anyone at all. Michael's gaze swept the room again. "This morning wasn't just about one officer's actions," he continued. "It was about a culture. A culture where disrespect and prejudice go unchecked. A culture where some officers feel emboldened to treat others, whether they're civilians or colleagues, with contempt." He stepped back from the podium, his voice rising slightly. "That ends today. As of now, this department will operate with respect, accountability, and integrity. If you cannot meet that standard, this is not the place for you." Michael let the silence linger for a moment before turning back to Captain Morris. "Effective immediately, Officer Danvers is suspended pending an internal investigation. His actions this morning are unacceptable and there will be consequences." Gasps rippled through the room and Danvers' face turned beet red. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but quickly closed it, realizing there was nothing he could say to justify himself. Michael turned back to the rest of the room, his tone softening but remaining firm. I know change isn't easy and I know trust is earned, not given. But I didn't take this job to maintain the status quo. I took it to make a difference and I hope you'll join me in that effort. With that, he stepped away from the podium, leaving the room in stunned silence. The officers began to file out slowly, their expressions ranging from shock to quiet contemplation. Danvers remained rooted to his spot, his confidence shattered. Michael watched them go, his calm exterior masking the whirlwind of emotions within. He knew this was just the beginning, but he was ready for the challenge. The culture of the precinct had taken years to fester, but he was determined to root it out, one step at a time. The precinct was a different place in the hours following Michael Carter's explosive introduction. Conversations were hushed, tension hung in the air, and officers avoided eye contact as they passed one another. The weight of what had transpired in the briefing room lingered heavily, especially over Officer Danvers, who remained seated at his desk, his face pale and expression unreadable. Michael, now in his office, leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped behind his head. Through the blinds he could see the officers going about their routines. There was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. More focused, less casual. It was a start, but Michael knew better than to mistake fear for respect or silence for progress. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his tone even. The door opened and Captain Morris stepped in, closing it quietly behind him. His expression was a mix of admiration and caution. "Chief," he began, settling into the chair opposite Michael's desk, "that was something back there." Michael nodded, his face unreadable. "It needed to be said. This department's reputation is on thin ice, Captain. My job is to rebuild it, and that starts with accountability." Morris rubbed the back of his neck, nodding slowly. "I can't say I disagree, but you've ruffled some feathers. Danvers especially. He's already talking about filing a grievance." Michael leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "Let him," he said firmly. "If this department's culture has bred officers who think they can treat people like that, then grievances are the least of my concerns. I want a full report on Danvers. Complaints, disciplinary action, everything. I also want to know who else has been fostering this kind of behavior." Morris hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Understood." As Morris stood to leave, Michael added, "And Captain, this isn't just about Danvers. It's about setting a standard. I need you on board with this fully." Morris paused, his hand on the door handle. "I'm with you, Chief. Just be prepared for some resistance. Change doesn't come easy around here." Michael gave him a small, wry smile. "I wouldn't be here if it did." The first sign of resistance came sooner than Michael expected. As he made his way through the precinct later that afternoon, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Officers whispered in clusters, their conversations halting as he approached. Michael ignored the stares and murmurs, his expression calm but his presence deliberate. He paused by the break room where a group of younger officers sat around a table. One of them, Officer Reyes, glanced up nervously and quickly looked away. Michael noticed her discomfort but chose not to address it directly for now. Instead, he stepped into the room and poured himself a cup of coffee. The silence was deafening. "Relax," Michael said, turning to face them with a small smile. "I'm not here to bite your heads off." Reyes chuckled nervously, the tension easing slightly. The others remained quiet, their eyes darting between Michael and the table. "Look," Michael said, leaning against the counter, "I know this morning was intense. But I want you all to understand something. I'm not here to make your lives miserable. I'm here because I believe this department can be better, that we can be better." Reyes finally met his gaze, her brow furrowed. "Chief," she began hesitantly, "what happened with Danvers? It was bad, but he's not the only one. A lot of us." She stopped, glancing at her colleagues. They avoided her eyes. Michael stepped closer, his tone soft but firm. "Go on, Officer Reyes. Speak freely." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "A lot of us have seen things, heard things, but calling it out, that's not easy. It's not just about losing respect, it's about survival in this place." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it. Change is scary and standing up to the status quo is even scarier. But it's also necessary. If you've seen or experienced something that doesn't sit right, my door is always open." Reyes nodded slowly, but her face remained uncertain. Michael didn't push further. Trust, he knew, would take time. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Michael's mind was already turning over a plan. He spent the evening reviewing personnel files, identifying patterns and potential allies among the ranks. He noted complaints filed against officers like Danvers and cross-referenced them with reports from civilians. Patterns began to emerge, small ones but enough to warrant action. The next morning, Michael called a meeting with the leadership team. Captain Morris, along with the department's sergeants and lieutenants, gathered in the conference room. The energy was tense, with many unsure of what to expect. "Let's get straight to it," Michael said, opening the meeting. "This department has a problem, and it's not just Officer Danvers. It's a culture issue. We've let bad habits, prejudices, and unprofessional behavior fester for too long. That ends now." A murmur spread through the room, but Michael raised a hand to silence it. "I'm implementing mandatory bias training for every officer, starting next week," he continued. "We'll also be conducting a thorough review of complaints filed over the past 5 years. I want to know who's been doing the right thing and who's been getting away with the wrong thing." One of the lieutenants, a burly man named Sanderson, spoke up, his tone defensive. "Chief, with all due respect, we've been doing this job a long time. We know how to police ourselves." Michael's eyes locked onto Sanderson. "Do you? Because what I saw yesterday says otherwise. If you think doing your job means tolerating misconduct, then maybe you've been doing it wrong." Sanderson shifted uncomfortably but said nothing further. Michael leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to fix what's broken, and if you're not willing to be part of that solution, you're welcome to step aside." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. "Change isn't easy," Michael concluded, "but it's necessary. And it starts with us." In the days that followed the leadership meeting, the precinct became a battleground of change. Chief Michael Carter's directives were clear, but implementation proved far from easy. Some officers welcomed the opportunity for reform, seeing it as a chance to repair the department's fractured relationship with the community. Others, however, resisted fiercely, their muttered complaints and subtle defiance growing louder by the day. Michael walked the halls daily, greeting officers, observing interactions and making his presence known. He wasn't there to intimidate, he was there to lead by example. Yet every now and then he caught snippets of conversation, grumbling about the new guy shaking things up, accusations of overreach or even outright hostility. One afternoon, Michael stopped by the roll call room where a group of officers was preparing for their shifts. He noted the tension in the air as he stepped inside. Conversations halted and eyes darted toward him. "Good afternoon," he greeted, his voice steady. "How's everyone doing?" A few murmurs of acknowledgement followed, but most avoided his gaze. Michael didn't press for more. Instead, he turned his attention to Officer Reyes, who had hesitantly spoken up in the break room days earlier. "Reyes," he said, "walk with me." She blinked, surprised, but quickly stood and followed him out into the hallway. Once they were away from the others, Michael slowed his pace and glanced at her. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Reyes hesitated, then shrugged. "It's different, sir. Some of the older guys aren't too happy with the changes. I hear it all the time, griping about the training, the reviews." Michael nodded. "And you? How do you feel about it?" She sighed, her expression conflicted. "I think it's needed, Chief. But it's hard to speak up. People don't forget when you take a stand. They'll make your life miserable." Michael stopped, turning to face her. "I understand that fear, Reyes. Believe me, I've been in your shoes. But silence only lets the rot spread. We can't fix this place unless people like you, people who care, are willing to take that stand." Reyes studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed. Finally she nodded. "I'll try, sir." Michael smiled faintly. "That's all I ask." Meanwhile, Officer Danvers was not taking his suspension quietly. He had filed an official grievance, claiming that Michael had overstepped his authority and targeted him unfairly. The precinct buzzed with rumors of his possible reinstatement, a scenario Michael was determined to prevent. One evening, Michael sat in his office reviewing the results of the internal investigation into Danvers. The findings were damning, a pattern of complaints stretching back years, excessive force, incriminatory remarks, and a blatant disregard for protocol. Yet time and again the complaints had been dismissed or swept under the rug by previous leadership. Michael picked up the phone and called Captain Morris. "I need you in my office," he said simply. Minutes later Morris arrived, his expression serious. Michael handed him the report. "This is worse than I expected," Morris said after reading through it. Michael nodded. "It's systemic. Danvers isn't the only one, but he's a symptom of the larger problem. This can't continue." Morris frowned. "You know pushing this could stir up a hornet's nest, right? Danvers has allies. Some of the higher-ups might not like what you're doing." Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "Let them. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to clean house." The next day Michael called another department-wide meeting. Officers filed into the briefing room with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Michael stood at the front, a stack of papers in his hand. "Good morning," he began, his tone firm. "I've called this meeting to address something that's been a shadow over this department for far too long: accountability." He held up the stack of papers. "These are the results of our internal investigation into Officer Danvers. What they reveal is unacceptable. A pattern of misconduct ignored by leadership, complaints brushed aside, and behavior that tarnishes the badge we wear." Murmurs spread through the room. Danvers, seated at the back, glared at Michael, his jaw tight. Michael continued, his voice unwavering. "Let me be clear. This is not about one officer. This is about a culture that has enabled misconduct and eroded the trust of the community we're sworn to protect. That ends now." He turned his gaze to Danvers. "Effective immediately, Officer Danvers is terminated from this department." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by a stunned silence. Danvers shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is a witch hunt." Michael held up a hand, silencing him. "You're welcome to appeal through the proper channels, but the evidence speaks for itself. This department will no longer protect those who abuse their power." Danvers stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining officers sat in stunned silence, the weight of Michael's decision sinking in. Michael looked out over the room. "I know this is hard. Change always is. But if we're going to rebuild this department, we need to hold ourselves to the highest standard. This isn't about punishment. It's about justice. For the community, for each other, and for the badge." As he stepped down from the podium, the room remained silent, but Michael saw something in their faces: respect. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The weeks following Danvers' termination were tense. The precinct buzzed with murmurs of uncertainty, speculation, and for some resentment. But amidst the tension, a shift began to take root. Michael Carter's decisive action sent a message that resonated far beyond the station walls. The days of complacency and misconduct were over. Michael knew the work was far from finished. Change, he reminded himself, wasn't an event. It was a process. He threw himself into the effort, working late nights to implement reforms, revamp training programs, and open lines of communication between the department and the community. He made sure to listen as much as he led, hearing out the concerns of officers who struggled to adapt as well as those eager to embrace the new culture. One morning, as Michael walked into the precinct, he noticed something different. Officers who once avoided eye contact now greeted him with nods of acknowledgement, and the chatter in the hallways felt lighter, more genuine. It wasn't perfect. Pockets of resistance still lingered, but the cracks in the old culture were beginning to show. Officer Reyes approached him near the coffee machine, her expression hesitant but hopeful. "Chief," she began, "I just wanted to say thank you. I know it hasn't been easy, but things feel different. Better." Michael smiled, his tone warm. "You're part of that change, Reyes. Don't forget that." She nodded, her confidence growing. "I won't, sir." The community too began to notice the difference. The once fractured relationship between the precinct and the people it served started to mend. Michael prioritized transparency, holding regular town halls where residents could voice their concerns and share their experiences. He encouraged officers to attend in plain clothes, urging them to see the community as partners rather than adversaries. One such town hall took place on a warm Friday evening. The local community center was packed, the air buzzing with a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. Michael stood at the front, his presence commanding yet approachable. "I know this department has made mistakes," he said, addressing the crowd. "And I know rebuilding trust takes time. But I want you to know that we're committed to doing better, to being better." A young woman in the audience stood, her voice trembling but resolute. My brother was mistreated by an officer here last year. He still doesn't trust the police. What are you doing to make sure that doesn't happen to someone else? Michael met her gaze, his expression earnest. I'm sorry for what happened to your brother. It's not enough, but I hope our actions moving forward will show him and you that we're serious about change. We're revising our policies, holding officers accountable and ensuring proper training. But we can't do it alone. Your voice matters. Keep holding us accountable. The room was quiet for a moment before applause broke out. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. Back at the precinct, Michael made time to mentor younger officers. He saw potential in recruits like Officer Lopez, a fresh graduate with a strong sense of justice but a tendency to second-guess herself. Lopez, he said one afternoon during a ride-along, you've got the instincts. Trust them but always balance them with respect and empathy. Policing isn't just about enforcing the law, it's about serving people. Lopez nodded, her resolve strengthening. Thanks, Chief. I won't let you down. Months turned into a year. The precinct underwent a transformation, not just in policy but in spirit. Officers who resisted change were replaced, while those who stayed grew into their roles as public servants rather than enforcers. Community events, once sparsely attended, now thrived with officers and residents working together to improve the neighborhood. On the anniversary of his appointment, Michael stood in the precinct's main hallway, reflecting on the journey. Captain Morris approached him, a rare smile on his face. You've done good here, Chief, Morris said. The precinct's not perfect, but it's unrecognizable from where we started. Michael chuckled, a hint of weariness in his tone. It's not just me, Captain. It's everyone who decided to step up, to believe in something better. At that moment, Officer Reyes walked by, sharing a laugh with Lopez across the room. A group of officers were discussing a recent community cleanup event, their camaraderie genuine. The precinct was no longer a place of division but of unity. Later that evening, Michael attended another community event. As he mingled with residents, a young boy approached him. The same boy who had once asked if he was really the chief. Hey, Chief Carter, the boy said, a grin spreading across his face. My dad says the police are different now. He says you're trying to make things better. Michael knelt to meet the boy's eye, his own smile soft. We are. And we'll keep trying. You hold us to that, okay? The boy nodded, his confidence growing. I will. As the sun set over Blue Ridge, Michael stood amidst the crowd, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time he felt certain of one thing. They were on the right path. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it. And in the heart of Blue Ridge, a precinct once plagued by mistrust was now a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to the power of leadership, accountability, and the unwavering belief that progress, however difficult, was always possible. And now join the movement for justice. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and make these stories a part of your daily life. Together we can create change.